Welcome to Dynamic Foundry Group. Today we are going to see a very another webinar from Dynamic Foundry Group, and this is webinar number 114. That is 114th webinar, and almost we are near to have 1 year of our journey of this webinar journey. And in those 1 year, we are already completed almost 114 webinar. So this is 114th webinar, and the topic is microstructure and metallurgy of bray cast iron. We all know in cast iron or bray cast iron, we are facing a lot of issues in microstructure, in matrix, in metallurgy, in machinability, and the answers for those questions are normally we doesn't have immediately or enough with us. So we thought that we have our such a webinar where we can get accumulated answers of all these questions, all these issues. And for that, we are very happy to have support from SNAM. Uh, they have been with us for last few months. They have been done a lot of couple of webinars with us earlier, and today also they are supporting us for this webinar. So thank you, Mr. Nadimuthu sir and whole SNAM team for supporting Dynamic Foundry Group and the whole foundry industry for cultivating the knowledge base and giving us a good technical support. Thank you. So I welcome Mr. Nadimuthu sir and his colleague, Mr. Veera, and I request Nadimuthu sir to take over from me and introduce him and start the presentation. One more thing, in this presentation, we are trying to get some questions from the registered participants and some experts and try to use those questions as an input for this webinar. So hopefully all the questions, all the queries, those we have already in our mind will be get answered in this webinar, hopefully. So thank you, sir, and please welcome and start.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And first, my thanks to Dynamic Foundry Group, and congratulations for the 114th webinar, which is a real good effort from your side in imparting knowledge to the foundry industry. If you look at the number of organized foundries, which means where it is done by big corporates and people, the rest of them are employees, or you can count with your two hands. The rest of the foundries are from they have been started by technocrats, which mean they have used their technical knowledge, and then they had to also multitask and do various roles of management. And when people enter these industries, you would see that we also all go into the same role of multitasking. So which means a focus into the one particular topic during your work hours becomes very, very difficult to specialize. It is through these sort of knowledge sharing sessions that people learn. And the amount of knowledge that is learned in campus that can be translated absolutely into industry is very less. And very few institutions, say like NIFT, Ranchi, which is fully dedicated to imparting the complete foundry knowledge to the youngsters. And that way, I think DFG is doing a very good job, and we thank you for providing this opportunity. This is the third that we are doing through SNAM Alloys, and SNAM Alloys having a dedicated R&D center. We are able to do a lot of experiments and in the foundry that is attached to the R&D lab, come out with a lot of defect analysis solutions, doing a lot of customer service, and through that gained a lot of experience in problem solving, having taken training sessions, conducting quiz programs. All this has been done by SNAM Alloys, and luckily I have been able to present a lot of these, and I had presented 2 webinars in DFG. But it is time that the learning is a continuous process, but teaching is a relay race, and we need to pass on the baton to youngsters. Veera, who will be presenting this, has been with the SNAM Alloys R&D services for the last 6 years, and he has been one of the key players who has supported me and the SNAM Alloys R&D team in all the webinars we have done, the quiz programs, the training programs, the audits we have done. So I thought it's right time to introduce Veera to handle the sessions, and he's got a good experience in handling training sessions and audits. I'm sure he'll do a very good job, and I wish him all the best. And all the credit goes to him. If anything is there, I will be working along with him in improving our services. Thank you, Mr. Sandeep. Thank you to all of you who have come here to listen to it. And over to you, Veera. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Veera, you can continue.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the opportunity provided, and a very good evening to one and all. It's a Sunday evening, so we are here to share knowledge and discuss about welfare of the foundryman, like improving our technical skills and sharing knowledge on our day-to-day activities, what we do in the foundry. So this presentation will be dealing with basics and metallurgy details of gray cast iron, particularly gray cast iron. Not we'll be touching the overview of the cast irons, but we'll be dealing more into gray cast iron this evening. So sorry, yeah. So what is cast iron? So the name by itself gives the meaning for and the advantage of this iron. The type of iron which can be cast easily is called cast iron, the basic definition by itself. So we all know it's nature's gift to foundrymen. Like foundrymen are the people who make castings to the desired engineering applications. So the castability is the major property, the very first property required out of an alloy by a foundryman, and it is nature's gift. And it requires very low energy compared to steel. The other forms of iron carbon alloy, cast iron melts at a very low operating temperatures. Like it melts around say 1200, 1300 maximum. So maximum liquidus temperature of any cast iron family alloy would be close to 1200, 1250 only. And they have equivalent and good strength when compared to other engineering materials like steels. When we compare one to one, like so far we have been from our history, we have been using forged steel and rolled steels for engineering applications. So when those were about to be getting converted into castings, so the major criteria, the engineering criteria, were strength requirements. So cast iron was able to produce cast iron was able to deliver the required strength with the castability property. So basically, cast iron family are alloys with minimum 2% carbon content, and the rest being iron plus some alloying elements based on the desired properties to be achieved. So the major advantage of having this extra carbon over iron over the commercial steels, castable steels available is, so there is a thing called solidification shrinkage, which happens like when there is a phase transformation from liquid metal to a solid liquid phase to a solid phase. There is extensive shrinkage. The volume contraction is about to happen. So when this type 2% carbon available in the gray cast iron or particularly cast iron family can compensate the volume contraction happening during the transformation, whereas this 2% carbon is not available in steels, and hence steels are generally cast with heavy feeders, and steels producing sound castings out of steel without this 2% carbon is very difficult. So cast irons can be cast easily, and sound free castings can be cast easily using this alloy, particularly with minimum 2% carbon. And as we know, as per iron carbon diagram, you can go up to maximum 6.6% carbon theoretically, but people do not add more carbon because there is no need of adding extra carbon more than about say 3.8, 3.9 or maximum 4% to any alloy in the cast iron family. So as I discussed previously, the liquidus temperature means the temperature at which the entire material becomes liquid, like no more solid exists. So it is way lesser than the conventional steels, which we also see this in the iron carbon diagram, where this particular alloy system has got a lower melting temperature than steels. So it has got a long freezing range of 150 degrees. Say, see, freezing range means the time taken or the range of temperature in which the liquid gets converted into solid casting. So this is the time where we can play with, where all our accessories like feeders and sleeves come into picture, and inoculation comes into picture, which helps in producing sound castings. So if the longer the feeding range, the difficult to feed, and the more demand for the accessories to support. So since we have 2%, like more than 2% carbon available, which produces, or which we intend to produce into free graphite, will expand by volume and then fill the uh, porosities or solidification issues. So the eutectic composition, which is generally achieved in this particular type of iron, like iron carbon system, then the entire iron carbon system, eutectic composition is available only in this particular range of carbon, which is at 4.3% carbon. So this is 4.3% carbon is an ideal carbon equivalent which we talk of. So it can vary between alloy to alloy based on the conditions and the chemical composition we maintain. So this is the Bible of metallurgists, and all steel and iron plants and cast iron and steel foundries are operating based on this graph only. So this is an equilibrium diagram. So when you see this equilibrium diagram, this is the line which we talked as the liquidus line. So any particular temperature and you drop a perpendicular line, and that gives you the composition, and that tells you about the melting temperature of the particular alloy. Say for example, our castane family starts at 2%. So when you drop a perpendicular from there, so its melting temperature is way less than all the conventional steels we have here. So anything below this is steel. So that is what we had discussed previously. So this gives us advantage for melting it faster and casting it faster. So this classification is based on the carbon content, different types of castanes available in the family. So starting from white castane, white by itself, it means it's cementite. When the fracture surface of this particular castane is bright in nature, so that is termed as white. And also in other terms, white means carbides in foundry terminology. So this particular castane has got cementite in its matrix basically, and you will have all the carbon present in the form of cementite, and it will be networked in nature. And malleable castane, you just heat treat the previous alloy like white castane. You make white castane as cast material, and then you do heat treatment, and you convert the cementite structure into pockets of carbon, not in a round shape or a preferred shape, but in an irregular shape and in the form of pockets. And that carbon gives you strength, and that is malleable iron. And then comes gray castane. Gray castane is type of castane which has got graphite in the form of flakes. It's a lengthy, long, three-dimensionally interconnected flakes. And then comes ductile iron. Ductile iron, by name itself, this material has got the maximum ductility out of all the castanes we talk of today. And this has got the graphite, the free carbon in the form of graphite, in the form of spheroids, round nodules, three-dimensional structure. And this gives the maximum strength and the ductility for the castine. And then comes compacted graphite iron. This compacted graphite iron, we cannot call it as a recent development. It has been there for they have been trying this for a longer time, and now it has reached the maximum visibility. It could be seen. This is an intermediate level of castine morphology between gray castine and ductile iron. So it has got a vermicular, flaky. It's not flaky, vermicular type. Like if the flake becomes rounded and then coarser, so you can call it as compacted graphite iron. So this is an intermediate structure between gray cast iron and ductile iron. So this presentation will be dealing more into gray cast iron. So these are just the pictorial representation of the matrix or unetched images of different castanes. You could see carbon in the form of cementite is iron carbide, and it is networked in nature. And you have gray castine here. It has got graphite flakes, and here malleable iron, which has got pockets of carbon. This matrix being iron, and here it is just carbon. This carbon has been produced because of this graphite has been produced because of this heat treatment. And then comes ductile iron, and this microstructure gives it the maximum ductility to the matrix, to the casting. And this has got vermiculite iron. This is an intermediate structure between this gray cast iron and ductile iron. So this is a statistical data, just to actually we should be proud of telling this, that the type of alloy which we are casting stands first in the entire world. Like out of the world casting production, as per 2019 data, gray cast iron is the maximum by volume, the cast material, gray cast iron, and then comes ductile iron. So when we take the entire cast iron family, the gray cast iron plus ductile iron almost put together comes up to 70% of the total world casting produced. So this is the part of cast iron foundries in the entire engineering industries, catering to various sectors like automobile, agriculture, railways, um, then to some extent construction steels, sorry, and then say textile industries kind of. So the castings what we make are giving the maximum revenue in the entire world casting industry. So let us talk about gray cast iron. So gray cast iron is the greatest quantity, like as per the previous slide, and it is not just an engineering material with superior properties, but this particular gray cast iron gives you the maximum castability. So it can be manufactured at a lower cost when compared to other, even when comparing to ductile iron and other cast materials. This can be manufactured at a very lower cost. So this is a kind of material anybody would choose to uh, apply in an engineering field, because this gives the minimum cost and maximum applications which can be taken from this. And the physical and mechanical properties achieved by this cast iron are because of its control over chemical composition and the ranges in which it operates, and the solidification, like the way it solidifies, and the matrix structure and the graphite morphology decides the end requirements of the properties. So these two are typical gray cast iron images. This is an etched image which shows you the perlite, and this is three-dimensional or higher magnification image, scanning electron microscope image of a gray cast iron, which is showing these are typical graphite flakes. So general characteristics of gray cast iron. So when we talk about gray cast iron, the first thing is its chemical composition, and the second thing is the morphology, which gives the property. So gray cast iron is a major alloy of iron, carbon, and silicon, with the manganese, sulfur, and phosphorus as supporting elements. These five elements, excluding excluding iron, carbon, silicon, manganese, sulfur, phosphorus. These five elements form the major part in determining the engineering properties, the end properties. The other alloying elements like chromium, copper, moly, vanadium, tin, these are added in different amounts and in different ranges, and also sometimes in combinations to achieve different varieties of properties. Like some would be requiring a wear resistant property, some casting would be requiring a high temperature, elevated temperature, strength properties, stress structure properties. Some would be just requiring a perlite, like just hardness and strength, and no other properties required. So these alloying elements are added in different amounts in different ratios. So in this gray cast iron, the free carbon, the carbon which is close to 3% or 3.2%, and gray cast iron generally contains almost like 10 to 12% of graphite by volume. This entire graphite is present in the form of flakes, like, with different morphologies. There are 5 different morphologies of graphite flakes by itself. So the entire 10%, the free carbon is present in the form of graphite flakes, which has got 5 different morphologies based on the solidification it is going through. And the matrix is predominantly perlitic. So the maximum ferrite content which can be observed in a lower grade like ISO 250, ISO 200 or ISO 150 will be almost like 20-25% ferrite, and the rest being perlite, and higher grades are completely perlitic. So which gives the strength and hardness for this material. So the name gray means when this particular casting, the material breaks and the fracture surface looks dull, grayish in color. So why is this particular cast iron being selected as an engineering material? So there are some properties which makes this material being selected. Like it has got a good castability, so intricate shapes can be cast, and very good machinability. So we can machine to the extent we want. It has got good wear resistance. It has got, since the matrix is completely pellitic, and some grades are cast with phosphorus and chromium, which gives good wear resistance out of special phases formed inside the casting during solidification. It has got a good damping capacity. So this entire gray cast iron has got a network of graphite flakes in it. Graphite flakes absorbs energy. So most of the lathe beds and bigger heavy machineries beds are made out of gray cast iron with um, graphite flakes in it. So the entire vibrational energy is absorbed by the flakes, or it is transmitted through the entire structure and absorbed by these flakes. So it reduces the damping. So it damps the vibration and it keeps the structure rigid. So this type of gray cast iron is selected because of its damping capacity property. It has got excellent compressive strength. It has got good tensile strength. Good tensile strength is a relative category. There is one other category, like ductile iron, which has got a higher strength, tensile strength than uh, gray cast iron. But when compared to equivalent grades, gray cast iron offers good tensile strength, and it has got variable modulus of elasticity at different section thicknesses. So these are general applications, like where you can find gray cast iron. You see, these are most people would have been casting these materials. Like gray cast engine blocks are made out of gray cast iron, and pump castings are made out of gray cast iron. You have got brake rotor, and this is made out of gray cast iron. Lathe bed, uh, it gives structural rigidity and damps the vibrations during machining operations. It is out of gray cast iron. Manual covers, which is generally exported, are made out of gray cast iron. There are ductile manual covers also, but gray cast iron also offers good strength, and then wear resistance, and then corrosion resistance also. So these are standard specifications. Like this, standards means the quality with which the casting is being qualified. Like what is the parameter to be considered in approving your casting. So if you are cast, there are different grades available: FG 150, 200, 220, 260, as per Indian nomenclature. So all the castings are decided based on the minimum tensile strength required and the hardness. So these are engineering properties decided by the application. So based on that, the composition and the properties are selected. And there are different standards being followed worldwide: international standard like ISO, and Japanese standard separately, and ASTM, EN standard, and Australian standard. But all of these will have similar, like any gray cast iron being certified by any of these standards will have similar results. The ISO 250 in Indian standard will be equivalent to FC 150 of Japanese standard. So both cast irons will be having minimum tensile strength of 150 megapascal. So coming to the nucleation, like how does this matrix structure arrive, or how is this property being achieved? And so any solid, like any liquid to solid transformation happening, will have some nuclei, the seeding thing happening, and upon which the entire solid starts growing, and then it ends up in becoming a complete solid. So here let us discuss about one theory, three-stage theory it is called, like how a nuclei is being produced, and around which how a graphite flake forms, and how the entire casting is made. So gray cast iron generally has iron, carbon, silicon, as there will be iron, carbon, silicon, manganese, sulfur, phosphorus, and other trace elements present in it. So calcium, aluminum, these two elements will be present along with the returns which we have been already cast. So these are basically oxidizers, very strong deoxidizers. So the moment this comes in contact with oxygen, nascent oxygen, it immediately gets oxidized. So calcium and aluminum present in the metal, liquid metal, either in the parent metal or intentionally added into the metal via special alloys. These form these micro inclusions in the form of oxides like Al2O3 and CaO. It is not particularly Al2O3, it is generally a complex compounds of Al. It is ALO, alumina, ALO dot SiO2 generally. And calcium is calcium oxide CaO. And this forms the core, the nucleation. The first deoxidizer, and the strongest deoxidizer is aluminum and calcium. So this forms the core. And around this, you will have a shell. Like this gives the structure and the basics. So this is generally made out of manganese and sulfur. So gray castine has got sulfur as its major, manganese and sulfur as its major elements. So this manganese and sulfur combine together to form a complex compound. It is not structure-metrically MNS. It has got other inoculating elements, special elements coming into picture also, MNS, and that is formed around the micro inclusion which was formed previously. Like ALO forms first, and around this entire shell MNS forms, and this MNS gives the platform for the graphite to precipitate. So when the graphite precipitates, like when the carbon comes out of liquid metal, because as we had seen the iron carbon diagram, the first solid forming in gray castine is austenite, which has got 2% carbon, but our metal contains 3.2% carbon. Say let us take a case, and the balance 1.2% carbon comes out of the liquid metal, and it should have a platform for which it can deposit and start growing. So this alumina core and MNS shell gives that particular platform which is required for the free carbon to stabilize and start growing. So where do these inoculating elements come into picture? Like what is the effect or function of this is, like there will be a compatibility issue between the manganese sulfide shell formed and the graphite. So these inoculating elements are surface active elements generally. Those are also deoxidizers like strontium, calcium, barium, zirconium. These elements go into these complex compounds. Like it forms that MNS, it goes into that MNS shell and forms manganese, and with that element under sulfide, or it goes into the core by itself, like it forms oxides along with aluminum and strengthens this shell and reduces the compatibility issue between the shell and the graphite. The compatibility issue is generally called as crystallographic misfit in metallurgical terms. Misfit in the sense like you cannot join a FCC lattice and a HCP lattice. So these two doesn't come together, or HCP lattice, a material solid which is about to precipitate on a if the solid to precipitate is HCP in crystal structure, and the substrate is BCC or FCC in nature, these two doesn't come close together. This is called as crystallographic misfit. So for this misfit to come down, these surface active elements like inoculating elements are helping together. So this makes the graphite to firmly sit on this MNS shell and start growing. So this is the way a nuclei is formed, and nuclei is supporting the graphite precipitation. So this is the reason why some people would be still following, or some people would always have a question that why can't I use just ferrosilicon? So silicon alone is not sufficient enough. I cannot say it is not an inoculant, but silicon alone is not sufficient enough, as these particular deoxidizing elements go into the shell and micro inclusions supporting the functionality. So how do we test gray castine, and what are the methods involved in testing gray castine? You have the conventional methods, like you look for chemical composition in the iron, like what is the desired chemical composition which has been set, and what has been achieved to achieve the required properties. The measure of elements like carbon, silicon, manganese, phosphorus, sulfur, and other alloying elements and trace elements are being measured, and this is measured generally using a optical emission spectrometer, and there are CE meters available which uses thermal analysis system, and it captures the liquidus temperature and measures the carbon out of it, and then silicon equivalent out of it. And microstructure properties like graphite morphology and distribution is analyzed using an optical microscope with different etchants for matrices, and mechanical properties are being measured to looking for uniformity throughout the casting, tensile hardness, and some cases wear resistance are being measured using special equipment. Machinability is a after effect of all the previous properties. If we have good control of chemical composition and desired microstructure is achieved, and with the mechanical properties we achieve the good machinability. And there are other methods being followed, also to be followed, other than the previous conventional methods, which can help immediately the foundryman to decide on the quality of the iron HS poured into the casting. Like you can pour chill wedge. Chill wedge is a very old test, but still a helpful test. It can give you shop floor results, immediate results. And eutectic cell count, this eutectic cell count is measuring the amount of eutectic cells present inside, which is directly going to reflect as the number of graphite particles, and again going to reflect in the engineering properties to be achieved, like uniformity in microstructure, desired microstructure, uniform mechanical properties throughout. Then comes thermal analysis. Thermal analysis is an extension of the CE meter. It measures the, it studies the solidification behavior of gray cast iron. So this is a typical chill test, and there is a ASTM standard against which it is being followed. So you will have different, you will have a gray part, you will have a mottled part, and you will have white part. So before and after inoculation, the white part keeps coming down. So that is the after effect of inoculation, and this is what is desired. And lesser the white or nil white will ensure good defect-free, carbide-free castings. And this is the standard for eutectic cell count measurement. And this is the way eutectic cell count is being measured. There's a special etchant available, and prepare the etchant, etch the sample, and you will be looking at these eutectic cells in this way. And there is a chart against which you can directly compare, like AFS chart. This is as per BCAA broadsheet. You can directly compare and then come up with the eutectic cell count. Before and after inoculation, the eutectic cell count should increase. This is a thermal analysis system. This captures the time temperature data. This will tell you how the iron is solidifying within a given time frame. So based on this solidification, there are interpretations available with which you can predict, or you can understand how the graphite morphology is going to vary, and how this change in graphite morphology and matrix can affect the end product, like defect-free casting, shrink-free casting, castings with carbides coming up. So this you can predict, you can interpret this curve, and you can understand. This is a ready reckoner, like you can do it on a shop floor with liquid metal. There are various softwares available with which it captures cooling curve, and then tells you the quality of metal, like the property of the metal, thermal property of the metal. So coming to the morphologies in gray cast iron, like different graphite morphologies available. It is nomenclature. The nomenclature is given based on the type. So type A talks of randomly shorter, randomly oriented flakes, and this is generally preferred for engineering applications, which has got good strength requirement. And the next comes type B. This is a rosette. It looks like a few. It typically looks like a rose petals together, like the clusters of smaller, finer graphite particles, like clustered in a single point. And then comes type C graphite. Type C graphite is coarser, thicker, and longer graphite. These are generally occurring in hypereutectic ions. This has got another name called Kish graphite in foundry terminology. Then comes type D. Type D graphite is produced due to cooling rate and chemical composition. And these are interdendritic graphite generally present, and this is produced out of an undercooled ion where the cooling rate is more than desired. And then comes type E. These are again interdendritic flakes, but this particular type of the difference between type D and type E is type D is a random oriented flake, undercooled interdendritic flakes. Type E is a preferred orientation with interdendritic flakes available. So this is the difference between type D and type E. So let us go into details of how type A, type B, C, D, E are formed, and what are its applications and its properties. And the next is about the size. So it is not just the shape factor, it is the size factor also which determines the engineering property. So different size classes are classified as per the standard, and the engineering property is achieved based on the required morphology of graphite with the size required. So it is not just achieving type A, so it is achieving type A out of preferred class like 4, 5, 6 as per the customer requirement. So variation or changes coming up with size class also affects the engineering property. So size class is determined by means of this comparative chart, and size class depends upon the section thickness and the cooling rate of the casting. So different section thicknesses will give you different size class, and these two, controlling the size class as well as the shape factor, is the primary job of an inoculant. So very potent inoculant will tend to produce very finer and randomly oriented flakes, more number of flakes, smaller, finer, and randomly oriented flakes. So the first thing is type A flake. So when the casting solidifies in a slow cooling rate, slow means the optimum required cooling rate, type A flake is produced. The size of the flake to a great extent is dependent on the section thickness and the number of nuclei present. So when the number of nuclei, which can be measured by using eutectic cell count measure or wedge test, and section thickness with the cooling rate, which is already determined by the simulation softwares. So the preferred cooling rate for a given section thickness in a casting, if that particular cooling rate is achieved, type A flakes can be expected, and it will be observed in the microstructure. The thinner the casting section thickness, faster will be the solidification rate, and the flake sizes will be smaller. So how does this impart strength in gray cast iron is, like the stronger gray cast irons will generally have smaller type A flakes, ranging from 4 to 6. The smaller the flake, the higher the strength. And when the preferred morphology is towards type A, you get the maximum strength. So we'll be dealing that in subsequent slides. So one of the major functions of inoculant is to produce smaller type A flake, as discussed previous. So type B flake. So the small, you would be surprisingly seeing type B flakes randomly coming in between type A matrix. Like here and there, some type B flakes coming up. It could be because of a localized undercooling. So the difference between type A and type B is a small undercooling coming into picture with the type A conditions will suddenly lead to type B flake. So type B flakes are clusters of smaller type A flakes in the form of group, like in the form of pockets. Like when, say for example, there are 10 nuclei present, and all the 10 nuclei yielding to 10 different graphite particles in 10 orientations will give you 10 type A flakes. What if all these 10 nuclei coalescence to be like it clubs together and forms like a bigger nuclei, and then a few graphite particles starting to generate or starting to grow, come together, and then start getting clusters, it starts giving you type B flake. It is because of the undercooling. So here comes the growth phenomena. The type A flake getting converted into type B flake, or it is a growth phenomena rather than into a nucleation phenomena. So this type B flake is produced with a slightly greater undercooling than type A conditions, and type B flake is not as strong as type A for the given section thickness and the given composition. So this is achieved generally in hypoeutectic gray irons. Type C flakes. This type of flake you will be seeing only generally in hyperotative compositions where you have more carbon equivalent, like carbon equivalent, localized carbon equivalent high, or the entire composition is demanding high carbon equivalent, and their casting demands higher carbon equivalent, or when the carbon equivalent is kept higher for other reasons than the required carbon equivalent. So this type of flakes will have lesser tensile strength and lesser hardness when compared to type A flakes. But this is the kind of gray cast iron composition which will yield you good machinability, because this is less stronger, less harder. So it is easy to cast and easy to machine. But machinability is not the only parameter. Rather than suiting machinability, the required engineering properties, achieving uniform engineering properties would be the target. So the reason for mentioning it as good castability is when you increase carbon equivalent, you tend to produce more number of graphite flakes, either larger by volume or more in number, and try to fill the cavities and produce sound castings. Increasing general tendency is increase carbon equivalent to take care of shrinkage, but shrinkage would be taken care, but you will have other consequences like hardness going low and then tensile strength going low. Though you'll be finding good machinability, like no issues in the machining shop, but still the engineering properties to be achieved will be less. So care to be taken on what the alloying elements to be chosen. So increasing carbon equivalent to solve the shrinkage issue and increasing alloying elements to increase hardness and tensile strength might not be a right choice. So altering the carbon equivalent to achieve both the mechanical properties as well as good castability, producing sound casting to be the ultimate target rather than increasing the alloying addition. So these are generally castings made for machine bases will have type C flakes, and this particular type C flake will give you a very good conductivity property. So because graphite is generally a very good conductor, and coarser, longer, thicker flakes will give you good conductivity property. So these type of castings which are put into sudden heating and cooling situations like ingot molds where the continuous casting is happening and knockout and then immediately pouring. These kind of situations come into picture. Type C flakes goes hand in hand. It will help in retaining the engineering property and then rigidity of the casting. Then comes type D. So if the required carbon equivalent for the particular section thickness is not achieved for a given casting, the morphology of graphite tends to become type D. So this is the degradation of morphology happening. So if the particular cooling rate and the for the given section thickness and the chemical composition is maintained, you get type A, and you start getting slightly higher increased cooling rate and undercooling, you get type B, and you increase your carbon equivalent, you end up in type C, and you don't keep the required carbon equivalent, it ends up in type D formation. Type D is known as interdendritic because these type of flakes are formed in between the dendrites, the growing dendrites of austenite, and that is the reason why these are shorter in size. And this will give you very non-homogeneous, non-uniform properties throughout the castings. So varying mechanical properties like hardness at different locations will be different because of this particular type D graphite present. There is no condition that type D graphite, presence of type D graphite will lead to carbides. Type D graphite is again graphite, so the free carbon amount is the same, but it is precipitated in a different morphology. So there is no condition that type D should always be associated with carbide. So the change in tensile strength or change in hardness, like lowering the hardness, is because of this morphology. Then comes type E. Type E is very low carbon equivalent. It is the same as that of type D, but type E has got a preferred orientation, like it will be banded in nature. But when you see type D, it is randomly oriented, like smaller, ultra fine type A grade of castings. Type E can yield better strength and then hardness than type D. But type E is not a preferred orientation, preferred morphology, but type E is better than type D in yielding the engineering properties. There is a small comparison between the tensile properties achieved for a typical case against type A, B, D. So when you look at this graph, so when you look at this microstructure, with the degradation of the morphology happening, the tensile strength keeps increasing. So to achieve the maximum tensile strength, the morphology to be achieved is type A, smaller, randomly oriented flakes. So then comes alloying elements. So we have talked about the graphite morphology, which helps in getting the uniform microstructure. These alloying elements go into the matrix and then gives the base or the maximum strength requirements or the mechanical properties requirements. So the reason for adding alloying elements are to increase its strength, to increase the hardness, improve the toughness, to get the maximum uniformity throughout the castings, reduce the section sensitivity because this alloy particularly behaves differently at different section thickness. High cooling rate in the smaller section thickness and slow cooling rate at a thicker section. So strength requirement at elevated temperatures like in engine blocks where it is put into very high operating temperatures, retaining the strength at that conditions, and good hardenability. There are heat treated ions available and include wear resistance like in the case of liners, and improved low temperature impact properties. If this casting is subjected to a low temperature application, retaining the strength and then properties at that temperature. So there are different alloying elements available: moly, chromium, vanadium, tin, manganese, copper, nickel. All these are pearlite promoting elements, and these elements have got its own effectiveness, like the power with which it can work. And these are generally added in combinations like moly plus chrome, moly plus copper, moly chrome nickel separately, moly chrome copper separately. But all these, when we talk of these alloying elements tend to go into the ion solution, like the ion matrix. So there is a possibility that this can, during solidification, combine with carbon and form similar carbides like iron carbides, like molybdenum carbide, chromium carbide, vanadium carbide. So care should be taken when selecting or using these alloying elements to achieve the desired properties, because to get hardness, adding moly, but moly can also lead to moly carbide, which can be undesired for that particular engineering application. So we should not be compromising in achieving the mechanical property by adding a alloying element which will give some other issue in the casting, which will affect the performance of the casting. So to some extent, inoculation will take care in ensuring the free carbon coming out of the austenite matrix to be precipitated as graphite, but there is a limitation for inoculation to work. Maximum inoculation can be done to maximum say 0.4, 0.5%, but alloying elements are generally more powerful than these inoculating elements. So alloying elements will definitely have its own effect during solidification. So you cannot nullify the 100% effect of alloying elements. So when extensive alloying is present, we'll have to live with carbides forming tendency by itself. So inoculation is not a direct solution for carbides from alloying elements. Care to be taken, like adjusting the cooling rate and geometry of the castings can be adjusted to meet the requirements. So let us talk about what all bad things happen, like what are called as like abnormalities in cast iron microstructure. Like as previously discussed, if type A is required, the all other four morphologies are anomalies. Like you don't want type B, D, E. But based on the cooling rate, and there is no ideal situation in foundry, you cannot expect 100% type A. Everybody would be expecting 100% type A, but you will be getting a mix of type A plus other graphites to a permissible limit. When this permissible limit is crossed by the unwanted morphologies, this starts affecting the engineering property of the casting, like hardness, tensile, and other mechanical properties. So you have Widmann-Staten graphite. This is particularly produced by means of an alloying element called lead. This is not generally alloyed; it comes along with the scrap. And general sources can be like painted scrap, where paint contains lead as a major element in it. So this increases the local, starts from giving you very fine flakes, like hair-like structure at the end of or the tip of the type A graphite flake, and this can become stress rises and lead to catastrophic failure during application. Then comes steadite. This steadite is again a eutectic phosphide, like iron carbide. This is iron phosphide, eutectic mixture of iron and phosphorus. We'll discuss about this later. And this next is spiky graphite. This spiky graphite has got a sharp edge towards the end, and this is generally observed in a very slow cooling rate or a very section thickness, high section thickness casting. And this is generally similar to Widmann-Staten graphite. Carbides. These carbides are generally iron carbides, and it can be a mix of iron and other carbide promoting elements. So iron carbide plus moly carbide, or iron and moly carbides together, because all these elements perform similar to iron. And type B, D, E, as said previously, when we target type A, all other graphite morphologies are abnormalities only. So this is just a general guideline, like how to select an inoculant for the particular process. So I have listed down different process parameters, the measurables, like section thickness, varying section thickness, and different inoculation addition rates and addition stages. And you have got a pouring time, long pouring time or a shorter pouring time, tapping temperature being high or low. So there are various commercially available inoculants with the different inoculating elements. So this is just a gist of how you can select inoculant based on the process parameter at your foundry. So with this, the introduction or some details about the metallurgy and microstructures of gray cast iron is coming to an end. And from the participants, we have got some technical queries, and we'll be discussing on the questions slowly. The first question was on how the flake size impacts the mechanical property. Like as I discussed previously, if shape factor and size factor comes into picture. Shape factor, we have discussed about how type A, B, C, D, E affects the properties, and the same way, how does the flake size affect? So this is when you look at this graph, as the flake size increases, the strength keeps coming down. So when you're looking at say for example 250 ISO 250 grade, if you're casting and you want a minimum 250 megapascal tensile strength, you should be casting a material with the shorter flake. As you increase the flake size, like when you let the material to cool very slowly, and the growth properties take over the nucleation, like more amount of growth happening, lesser the amount of nucleation happening, the flake starts growing, and you'll end up in getting the lowest tensile strength for the given composition. It will still be type A, but a longer type A. So longer the flake, lesser the mechanical property, lesser the strength, lesser the hardness, and lesser the toughness also. So gray cast iron is generally section sensitive. So as the section thickness increases, cooling rate is lower, and it eventually affects the size of the flakes. And this is how the size and the mechanical properties are related. So next is as previous, like how does type B flake affect the mechanical property, like particularly casting toughness and cracking tendency? So as I had explained previously, type B is produced in a type A condition where you slightly have increased undercooling, like localized undercooling happening. So this is rosette type microstructure. This can give you uneven hardness or uneven toughness throughout the casting. So when we talk of this particular two mechanical property like toughness and cracking tendency, toughness is measured generally as area under the curve. When you do a tensile testing, you get a tensile stress strain curve, and the maximum point at which the material fails is measured as the tensile strength, ultimate tensile strength, and the area under the curve is measured as toughness. And toughness is nothing but the energy absorbed up to failure. So when you have a higher tensile strength material, so the graph is going to be longer, and the area under the curve is going to be longer. So material with higher tensile strength will have higher toughness generally. So type A flake has got a higher tensile strength than type B flake. So eventually type B flake can affect your toughness, and it can reduce your toughness also. Cracking tendency is cracks can be it can be taken in two different ways, like initiation of the crack and then propagation of the crack. So when you talk of initiation of the crack, as type B flakes produces less strength and less hardness material, so that it can be prone to cracking tendency. And again, when we talk of propagation of the crack, this is again a weaker spot, because type B, this particular location will be less stronger than the other location, so it can also lead to propagation of the crack. So how do we analyze a microstructural defect? So this can be taken in different ways. So there are two categories, like you can analyze inclusions microporosity or gas porosity as a microstructural defect, and you can go into details and analyze the root causes or the morphology of the defect. Or it can be the graphite type, the carbides and stratites and other micro constituents which can be achieved. So if we consider inclusions and microporosity as the defect which we want to analyze, and we should take enough care such that our sample preparation should not destroy the evidence or the defect location, like excessive polishing, excessive grinding or cleaning may take away the evidence or the residue of the defect with which we are looking for the root cause. So we can analyze at different magnifications like 50x and 100x, and look for the morphology. Like generally microporosities will have dendritic morphology, and dendrites can be visible if the size of the defect is bigger. Gas porosities generally will be a dent kind of, will have a smoother finish inside. Inclusions are irregular, and it looks, when you look into an optical microscopy, inclusions look dull grayish or blackish in color when the matrix looks brighter or whiter. And if our intention is to analyze the micro constituents, like defects related to the microscope or metallography, like graphite type, size factor, shape factor, carbates and steroids. And again, here again, the sample preparation in any kind of microscopic analysis, the sample preparation plays a major role. Care to be taken that none of the actual details is lost. Like when we do excessive cutting, excessive force during cutting, like cutting without a cooling, where you superheat the material and then you suddenly cool it, so the matrix structure can vary, and the orientation in which we cut, that can affect the graphite morphology analysis. So care to be taken in the sample preparation part, which is generally neglected or less attention is given to it. So proper tools may be employed during sample preparation stage, such that we actually capture the defect which is present inside the casting. Rather, we destroy or we make some like some modifications that happen during sample preparation, and we are trying to analyze based upon it. So care to be taken during sample preparation also. So if it is microstructural defects, and you can do a unetched analysis at 100x, and go highly magnify and look for any fragments of graphite if present, like at 400x or 200x or 400x. And etched samples, etching can be done at different with different etchants at different concentrations, like nitrile 2%, 4%, or pickerel 2%, 4%. You have Stets reagent, you have got Murocumus reagent to analyze different phases of micro constituents of a gray cast iron. So generally, carbides, steadites are being analyzed at higher magnifications, but carbide ratings generally to be done at 100x. The standard calls for 100x rating of carbide. So magnification of carbide, magnification can be done to look for the networking of carbides or steadites, but the rating to be given only at 100x. So this is again another generic question. How do you analyze the history of a defect? So when we want to analyze the history of any defect for that matter, first of all, we should have the records available with us. Generally, any defect analysis will involve the statistical tool. It can be 8D, or it can be 7QC tool, any of the 7QC tools, or it can be any customer specific tool to be used to analyze a defect. But if the defect is recurring, generally there are two categories, like defect which is occurring for the first time, and defect which is recurringly coming again and again in the process. So if the defect is generally recurring, then let us look at the process of MEA, which we had prepared during the PPAP stage. And has this defect been predicted and identified at the start, and has there been any corrective action proposed? And in that case, has that corrective action been taken and implemented in the shop floor, like the control plan change happening and monitoring the change in the control plan, and how many times this control plan has been changed or modified to solve this particular problem again and again. So history of these things can be studied, and these data should be available for the day-to-day person to analyze and come to a conclusion, like what steps have been taken previously to avoid this defect during the previous occurrences. Again, this question on copper in gray iron. So gray cast iron is generally paralytic in nature, predominantly paralytic, or sometimes it is fully paralytic. So when we talk of the alloying elements being added to achieve the same parallite, the increasing order of, or the effectiveness of getting the maximum strength and hardness out of the alloying elements is moly gives the maximum effectiveness. Like moly is a strong perlite promoter, carbide promoter. Also, it gives the maximum strength and hardness. So in this series, if we see, copper comes almost to the end, to the last of the effectiveness line. So Castaigne composition generally has chromium and moly, or sometimes chromium only, in the range of 0.2 to 0.25 to achieve the desired mechanical properties. So chromium is 2 times powerful than copper. So to get the equivalent effect of chromium, you should be adding 0.4% or more copper to get the same effect of chromium, which is being done by chromium at a lesser levels. Chromium increases hardness and tensile strength together, but copper does not increase the hardness to a greater extent, but still increases the tensile strength at a higher addition rate. This is the reason why we tell copper is not as effective, because all these elements are added in combinations, not just particularly or only copper or only manganese or only chromium. No such conditions exist. So there will be manganese available, 0.6 to 0.8 manganese generally being maintained, and 0.15, 0.2 chromium is generally added. So copper is not specifically added to produce or to get maximum effect out of it. It is just supporting manganese and chromium in the perlite forming and then increasing the mechanical properties. As discussed previously, this question is again about the flake size. What will happen to the mechanical properties if there is a drift in flake size? Like if you want 4 and then you end up in 1, 2, 3, smaller the number, larger the flake size. So when you have smaller flakes than required, your strength is more, and when you have longer flakes than required, your strength is less. Effect of sulfur. So this particular sulfur element goes into the shell formation, as we had previously discussed on the graphite morphology nucleation. So this sulfur is to be combined by manganese to form that particular shell, which is the platform for carbon to precipitate and grow as graphite in the required morphological shape. If this sulfur is not being tied up by manganese, sulfur can form iron sulfide. Like a sulfur, free sulfur is available, it will readily react with iron, forming iron sulfide, which is a hard and brittle phase, and with hard and brittle phases again lead to varying hardness, and then it can reduce the machinability locally. To some extent, it can even lead to crack forming tendency and then field failure also. As sulfur is the major core for the shell, so sulfur is minimum required in the range of 0.6 to 0.8, and manganese is required in tying up stoichiometrically to this level. Like there is a formula equation tells about like manganese required to tie up with sulfur, like 1.7 times of the sulfur is required by from manganese to tie up, and the balanced manganese works for perlite formation. So if we had, say for example, if we have 0.6 manganese or 0.7 manganese, like 1.7% into the sulfur present in the material will be taken for the shell formation. The balanced manganese available in the metal only helps in formation of perlite. Again, sulfur and phosphorus in gray cast iron. So as discussed previously, sulfur helps in forming the shell, and shell deserts the morphology. So sulfur is a very important element in the gray cast iron matrix, and when untied, sulfur can lead to brittle phases. Phosphorus can to some extent support in fluidity of cast iron, because phosphorus is an interstitial element, so it can go into lattice of iron and then it can support in flowability. But the main purpose of phosphorus being added as phosphorus gives wear resistance for special applications like liners and all, where the wear resistance is the required property over strength and then hardness. But phosphorus again forms steadite, like the eutectic mixture of iron and phosphorus. This phosphide does not just come alone. So when you have iron phosphide together, there is a favorable condition that it can let carbon precipitate as iron carbide also. So care to be taken in maintaining phosphorus in the non-wear resistant applications, where phosphorus to be maintained to a minimum level. Manganese to sulfur ratio. This is the minimum sulfur required in the metal. minimum manganese required in the metal to tie up with sulfur. So any amount of sulfur, if you put 0.01 sulfur, that much amount of manganese you need. You put 0.05 sulfur, or you have 0.05 sulfur, that much amount of manganese is required. Balance, it goes into the perlite formation. So when you look at this graph, as the sulfur content increases, you can see the cell count, like the eutectic cell count increasing. Eutectic cell count is a direct measure of the number of nuclei present. So as the sulfur increases, and this sulfur being tied by manganese, this particular sulfur with manganese can increase the eutectic cell count. Just increasing sulfur with the absence of manganese or adequate manganese will not increase in cell count. Rather, it will end up in iron sulfide brittle phase formation. So sulfur to be maintained above O5, O6 to get the maximum cell count and maximum graphite particles in the out of the available free carbon. So type D and E, as discussed previously, type D is formed. Type D has got an effect decreasing the tensile strength and decreasing the hardness in the matrix of the gray cast iron. And type D is generally interdendritic and shorter flakes. It gives ununiform properties throughout the matrix. The other issue with type D is type D and type E starts giving ferrite in the matrix, because these are very shorter flakes, and you will have ferrite around it, like just austenite getting transformed into because more of austenite present in type D and E. So these austenite, when crossing the eutectoid transformation temperature, it starts producing more ferrite. So whenever type D and E is present, you will have ferrite encapsulating the type D and E matrix, graphite flakes. So when ferrite is present, which is a softer matrix than perlite, your tensile strength eventually comes down. So this is one of the reasons why type D and type E is not favorable for engineering properties. So what is the effect of cast iron boring addition to 70% on metal quality and microstructure? For any foundry for that matter, the charge mix to be decided, the charge mix to be arrived at based on the conditions of the foundry and the type of castings being produced and the quality expected out of the castings being produced. So there can be a general guideline on charge mix, but every foundry will have to work on the general guidelines and try taking the maximum of it and suiting to their foundry rather than just going by guidelines, because every foundry is different. Not all the foundries or not all the metals are is the same. So charge mix to be arrived by individual foundries only, and borings are generally their own material, like whatever material is being cast as casting and then it is being machined and then chips. So borings are generally reused because you know the composition of the material which is going into the furnace. That is the advantage you have, and the other advantage is you will have all the alloying elements going into the metal again. So lesser additions or lesser requirements of alloying elements come into picture, but there is a issue that borings does not bring any nuclei into the metal. Borings are just iron, carbon, silicon, manganese, moly, copper, chromium if present. So it doesn't bring any impurities inside, and it doesn't provide any extra nuclei. It is just adding the elements to the liquid metal. So when you have this particular type of charge material in your charge mix, which is not going to provide any nuclei, and it is going to be a loss in nuclei particularly. So when there is loss in nuclei, then there is demand for inoculation increasing, and if inoculation is not done properly or not to the adequate level, you can end up in all solidification related issues. Borings also can have oil, rust, and other foreign particles as contamination, which can generate more slag or become inclusions also. Care to be taken on that particular front also. What is the role of pig iron and MS scrap? These two form the major part of the charging materials. So pig iron contributes carbon, silicon, sulfur, phosphorus, to some extent titanium also. Pig iron comes with its own impurities, like it will have oxides in it because it is a crude form of iron. Iron being melted and poured into casting, it is not refined at all, unlike steel. So since you have oxides and impurities, and the entire the entire nucleation process is heterogeneous in castine family, and this impurities coming up along with the pig iron can act as heterogeneous nuclei, and graphites can start growing along it. Since pig iron contains almost about 4.2 4.3% carbon, it can also contain flakes like coarser, longer, thicker flakes like type C flakes, which we talk of. So this flake, again, when you melt, this disintegrates, but this can become a micro constituent for nucleation, again, on which new flakes can develop. So pigane comes with the impurities as well as some flakes if present, which can act as the nuclei. So pigane is beneficial, but the trace elements also to be checked when pigane is being used, where it can come up with uh, elements which can degrade the morphology of the graphite. MS scrap. MS scrap also contains manganese and some oxide impurities, because not all MS scraps are completely killed, like oxygen removed. So it also comes with impurities, which helps in to some extent in the heterogeneous nuclei. But impurities are helping in heterogeneous nucleation, but the control or the level of impurities to be measured and to be arrived at by the foundries. Hence, we have done some studies at our end, varying the charge mix, like varying the returns levels by percentage, varying the pigane levels and varying the scrap levels. And what we have observed is, for the same casting, same section thickness, same chemical composition to be achieved, a charge mix with pigane and MS scrap greater than the returns present. Say, for example, if the charge mix is 100% and pigane plus scrap constitutes to 70% or 80% or 60%, balance 40% being returns, you tend to get more desired microstructure and mechanical properties. But generally, foundries operate with rejections where their returns quantity keeps increasing, and whenever there is demand or variation or short supply happening in pigane or MS scrap, they tend to add returns. Also, returns will give you alloying elements together. So returns can be generally added more, or there is a tendency that returns adding more will increase, will save cost, but doesn't provide any extra nuclei per se. Effect of pouring temperature on the casting microstructure. There are two categories, like you pour at a high temperature, you pour at a low temperature. Both of these will kill the nuclei directly. So when you pour at a higher temperature, that means you are keeping or you're holding the metal at a higher temperature than required. So all these micro constituents present inside the liquid metal as nuclei, when kept at a higher temperature, can start losing its stability and it can redissolve into the melt. So the effect of inoculation, or if you the nuclei which was already present in the liquid metal will be lost continuously, and you will be looking at more amount of slag being generated when you maintain or when you pour at high temperature. It is those slag is generated because of this micronuclei getting redissolved into the metal and becoming oxides. Low temperature, again, it can lead to poor response to inoculation. So you will not have stability for the nuclei again, because the temperature has uh, almost reached close to the eutectic, or closing towards the solidification temperature, where the graphite cannot compensate for the increase and decrease in temperature, and the inoculation effect will be ununiform, like small pockets of sudden increase in temperature because of graphite dissolution can happen, and it will be ununiform, like uniform mixing or uniform graphitization will not happen. So the properties achieved will be non-uniform. Pouring high temperature, you will be spending more money, losing more nuclei. Pouring at low temperature, you will be losing the maximum output of the inoculation effect. So the properties achieved will be non-uniform. Copper will have the same effect in cast iron, like gray cast iron and ductile iron. As discussed previously, copper will increase the strength without giving any carbides. Carbide forming tendency for copper is almost nil when compared to other carbide formers. Copper can be a good option to increase tensile strength in heavy section thickness, but copper is to be added in higher volumes than other pearlite promoting elements like chromium or moly. So that is the cost factor coming in, where you will be needing more copper to achieve the same strength and then hardness at a given section thickness. Aluminium. This is again another major question or query comes in. Like what is the level of aluminium to be maintained and what will high aluminium do? So when you look at this, aluminium goes into the core, the nuclei. Aluminium is required for the cast iron. So without aluminium, you will actually be facing issues like poor graphitization coming up, because the core for MNS shell formation itself is aluminium. So you definitely need aluminium. So levels of aluminium to be achieved or desired, it can vary foundry to foundry based on aluminium levels and then the surroundings, environmental conditions and mold conditions. So the general issue with increasing aluminium is pinhole forming tendency. But if the mold, like the sand quality and the mold making process and the casting solidification and the amount of gases generated is reduced or can be controlled by having a good control on the practice, aluminium can be favorable. But favorable or required amount of aluminium to be arrived at by individual foundries separately. Phosphorus tend to form eutectic solid, which forms which also favors the formation of eutectic carbides. So phosphorus can form phosphorus iron eutectic, also iron phosphide and iron carbide eutectic together. So these two, iron phosphide being the hardest phase over iron carbide, but these two elements, when in network, can lead to interconnected phosphide eutectic network can lead to catastrophe. So care to be taken to control phosphorus levels when not required, like non-wear resistant applications. So it is advisable to have maximum 0.8 or to some extent 0.1. So just increasing phosphorus in the idea that phosphorus increase will give me increased fluidity might not work every time, because the metal by itself is fluid. So it has got enough carbon to take care of the fluidity. What is the effect if MS scrap is reduced? As discussed previously, the same answer, and MS scrap comes up with its own impurities which can help in nucleation. So pig and MS scrap combinations will support formation of good microstructure, but care should be taken in arriving at the optimum range of additions. Type C graphite, as discussed previously, it is generally achieved at higher carbon equivalent location. It can be higher carbon equivalent throughout the matrix or localized carbon equivalent, increased carbon equivalent, or high carbon equivalent for the particular section thickness. If the casting has got varying section thickness and the carbon equivalent what we select should be an optimum for the entire casting. Say for example, if say for a 20 mm section thickness and a 40 mm section thickness, we take an average of the we tend to set our carbon equivalent for 20 mm such that we increase carbon equivalent. That can be dangerous to a 40 mm section thickness. Care to be taken in avoiding these kind of issues. So we should be trying to ensure that the solidification pattern or the solidification issues taken care by the methoding rather than increasing the carbon equivalent. So this is how we select carbon equivalent for different types of castings and section thickness. So the first thing is what is achieved, what is targeted. Like you always want a minimum strength material which can give you minimum strength. So you target the tensile strength for the given section thickness, and you select the carbon equivalent according to the strength required. So we have come to the last slide. Any further queries can be taken
up? Thank you, Virat. There is one question, the chat box regarding superheating.
Yes, sir.
Metal is superheated. What are the impacts and how it affects the microstructure and metallurgy in the cast iron, or for any type of metal we can say.
So generally the superheating to be decided by the foundry layouts. Say for example, the temperature at which we should operate should be determined by the temperature required at the last box of pouring. Say if you want the last box pouring temperature to be 1370, and for your foundry conditions, if you pour at 8 minutes, you will be losing in 8 minutes 100 degrees. So you add 100 degrees, you actually have to back calculate. So 1370 at the 8th minute. So add the loss in temperature for the 8 minutes as 100 degrees and make it 1470. And the number of transfers you have, and if you can expect for your foundry layout, if it is 50 degrees, so 1470 plus 50, 1520. So 1520 should be the temperature at which you should have. Anything above 1520 is a superheat, and it is going to cause loss in temperature, loss in the nuclei. Even this 1370 to be arrived at based on uh, the solidification required inside the casting, such that it doesn't affect the graphite morphology. So foundry should look at reducing the superheat rather than avoiding filling defects.
Yeah, that's true. But many times what happen due to slag built up and all these things, mainly during the sintering cycle, we have to superheat the metal above whatever temperature we require. And then there, as you rightly say, there is a loss of nucleation. So how to compensate that loss, and whether after doing all these things, you have any trials on that, whether we can able to compensate that particular nucleation loss in actual?
Sir, there are two things actually. So the loss due to superheating can, to some extent, can be taken care by inoculation, like doing a stage-wise inoculation, which can support while tapping and then while filling the mold. Or there can be a pre-inoculation in the furnace, which can support or which can take care of the superheating and the loss happening in the nuclei inside the furnace. Like when you want to tap at 1520, but your foundry conditions doesn't support it, and you will actually have to tap at 1550. That increase in 30 degrees and the loss in nuclei can be taken care by any special alloys being added in the furnace, like pre-inoculation kind of, to some extent. That can help actually.
Any questions? I have two more questions, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
One is we are talking about superheating. I'm now talking about supercooling. That is the knockout rate.
Okay.
My standard time is 45 minutes. If that exceeds, what will happen? Or if my standard time of 45 minutes it has been knocked out earlier, that is on 30th minute, what will happen to the casting or to the metallurgy, to the microstructure, and to the properties? This is question number one. And another question is, okay, we'll just go through that question and then I will ask the next question.
Okay, sir. This knockout time to be decided by the thinnest section of the casting, sir. So generally, after the eutectoid temperature is reached in cast iron family, it is just going to be a coarse perlite or fine perlite. So the knockout temperature, eutectoid temperature is generally 723 degrees Celsius for a general cast iron. So when you knock out, the temperature should be way lesser than 723, like close to 600 or close to 500 something, and that is to be determined by the thinnest section. So the part of the casting which is going to be affected by the knockout temperature and time is the thin section. So when you so when you knock out early, the thin section can solidify, like it can cool faster, can lead to like the change in the microstructure happening. The thick section is already cooling slow, so there is not much effect on the thick section of the casting. Thin section to be taken care, and early knockout can affect thin section properties, like surface properties. When we measure as cast hardness, it can be high, or uneven hardness can happen.
But late knockout will not affect much.
Yes, sir. Say after certain temperature, there is no transformation, phase transformation happening in cast iron. So that means after 723, it is just cooling down. So it is like annealing. When you cool slowly, when you cool faster, you get the coarse pellet and fine pellet. That too, after 600 or 500 degrees Celsius, that transformation is also very minimum. So
So knocking
Knocking
the
out
casting
slower-
after 24 hours will not affect the casting hardness?
No, 24 hours in the sense it can lead to surface annealing. Like your surface properties can change.
Surface properties can change.
Surface
Up
properties,
to
like when you-
what? Up to which? How many thickness it will affect?
Sir, that determines on the that is based on the geometry, because
Geometry of the casting.
if the mold size is bigger, then more amount of sand, then more insulation, more annealing. So it is that way, sir. So you should not let casting to be inside the mold for a longer time, not for a shorter time also. That is decided by the geometry of the casting.
Geometry of the casting. We are pouring test bars, and from the test bar we check hardness and microstructure also from the tensile bar itself. So what are the difference between the casting hardness and microstructure and the tensile hardness and microstructure? Is there any relation by standard?
So the standard generally calls for only separately poured test coupons. Like it has to be poured in a similar mold in which the casting is poured, and the similar metal the casting is poured. So, for example, if you make a green sand mold, and you should be making the step block, or round tensile bar or a Y block in the desired shape what the casting standard calls for, it should also be in green sand, and the metal should be the same. The same metal what you pour into the casting should be poured into the test block, and there is no separate standard for casting drawn tensile bar or cast on tensile bar. As a standard, the ISO 250 minimum 250 megapascal requirement is from the separately poured coupon only. But there are guidelines available, like at different section thickness, what can be the recommended tensile strength and hardness. But it is the standard tells it is between the manufacturer and the purchaser. So there is no separate guidelines. But when the section thickness increases, as we said, the tensile strength and hardness comes down, and it will be different when the metal poured is different. The properties can be different.
So for certain geometry, we can establish that relation for
Yes,
foundry to foundry.
Yes, it is to be established for the particular casting, and not all castings will suit the same requirements.
It will vary from foundry to foundry as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Casting to casting. Within a foundry, casting to casting also.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Yes.
For FG to 60 grade, how much yield strength required?
Yield strength, sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, yield strength is not the required criteria for gray cast iron. So when you go over any standards, and the gray cast iron is specified by means of hardness and the tensile strength, minimum tensile strength. So the standard doesn't even call for elongation, but you will be getting an average of 1.5 to 2% elongation in gray cast iron also. So it is not that gray cast iron does not have elongation. It doesn't yield at all, sir, because gray cast iron is not a material supposed to yield.
Okay. Last but not a least question from me. You're talking about inoculation as a nucleation. Yes. So what will be the maximum time we can able to take after this inoculation process? What should be the maximum time we can able to pour to get better result or proper nucleation? Is there any standard guideline for that?
Sir, this again is a relative question, because the potency of the nuclei, the potency of an inoculant is measured by means of the effect, like to what extent it retains the desired microstructure. That is varied because that varies upon the amount of metal to which you add and the type of castings you pour. And a foundry pouring 8 minutes and pouring 25 mm, 30 mm castings will get a different control over the inoculation effect, and a foundry adding this inoculant and pouring a 5 mm or a 10 mm casting will have different control or different effect of that inoculant. So in both the cases, the inoculant can be the same, but the effect of inoculant to be measured actually case to case. If you ask for a general guideline, you can pour up to 8 minutes or 10 minutes max, and provided if you do a 2-stage inoculation, because the moment the inoculant dissolves, it starts fading. The fading is with any additive to the material. The effectiveness starts fading the moment it dissolves. So it is better to compensate the inoculation by itself. Like you do a 2-stage inoculation, you split the inoculant into 2 and add it at 2 levels. That will help a lot. That is a way you can improve the effect of inoculation with the same existing setup.
So it depends on the degree of inoculation in your base metal.
Yes,
it depends on your wall thickness and your geometry of the casting.
Yes. If your base metal is not responsive to the inoculant, then any good inoculant you select, it doesn't help you at all.
And once you put the inoculation is start dissolving, it will start fading as well.
Yes.
So that is why we have to make multiple stages of the inoculation to get better results.
Yes, sir. Yes, like the most feasible way.
Great.
For a foundry.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was a very nice presentation. I will say it will work as a guidebook for the pupil who is looking as a gray cast iron, maybe starter or learner. It will make like a guidebook for them as well. So you have been starting from what is cast iron up to microstructure, or everything you have explained in a proper way, in a very systematic way, in a simple language, we can say, and that's really great work you have done. I think it's a very nice, you can say, literature or kind of guideline book has been prepared from you. It will be helpful to all foundrymen in future as well. So thank you very much for such a wonderful presentation and such a nice presentation. Nadimuthu sir, thank you very much again. Veera, you have taken great efforts, and thank you for your excellent presentation. And I hope everybody has enjoyed it and they will get some really good benefit from this.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Veera, for a good presentation. I hope the participants and all the viewers of DFG, benefited by this. And we have answered all the question and answers of what is got from the, people who have registered. So it directly goes to them. And once again, thank you, Mr. Sandeep, for providing this opportunity to snap
with this, I think we one question comes arise in the beginning of this, we can say, start of webinar, that is whether this is specially dedicated to the cast iron or it will also consider AGIAN. So I told him that it is dedicatedly for the gray cast iron, and we'll make one for AGIAN in future, maybe after next first quarter of the next year.
Definitely,
so definitely. I am looking for that as well from you. Okay. Your support and your technical, we can say, help to this foundry industry and to Dynamic Foundry Group.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. And
thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And thank you, participants, for attending this webinar. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, sir.